Good morning, world. All kinds of things are happening in the news. And of course, one of those things is the heat, because it has definitely been hot here in Durham, North Carolina for the last couple of days. I think the heat has been around 98 degrees. It might be getting a little cooler today, but not much. I think it'll still be in the high 90s. And we're going to be talking later on to a sleep person. And we definitely know that heat can sometimes impact our sleep as well as a number of other things as well. So that is definitely something that goes on. And I do think that a cool front is supposed to be coming in, a cold front, and all along those lines, and that might make it a little bit cooler, maybe in the more manageable 80s and all along those lines. But that is also because of the tropical weather that we're having that is coming out of the Atlantic as well. So that is some of the things that are going on in the world. And of course, we do know that weather can impact your sleep habits, and a number of other things can impact them as well. So when we get to Dr. Krakow, we'll be talking about some of these things with him as well and learning his thoughts on some of these issues and all along those lines. In terms of world events, it looks like Biden is betting on the emerging markets as the Chinese leader, Xi, is missing the G20. And apparently, it's not just about rising India, but his own insecurities, meaning that of China's Xi, and all along those lines. So it looks like definitely both Putin and Xi will be skipping the G20 summit. And during that time, Biden will be looking to woo back allies during this time and all along that kind of way. And apparently, India may be moving to change its name to the ancient Sanskrit term and all along those lines. So there is definitely that whole invitation that went out to the G20 that had Bharat in the title. And of course, there's a whole debate as to what this all means and all along those lines, because definitely that is something that I'm sure the G20 and maybe even Mr. Modi will be having conversation about, because the invite is fueling speculation that the country could be changing its name. And like I said, to mention that hurricane that is out there and all along those lines, and that is something that is going on in the news as well. I guess that I should be maybe honored because the hurricane has my last name and all along those lines. So Hurricane Lee is strengthening from a tropical storm and is rapidly strengthening as it turns toward the Caribbean islands and all along those lines. So right now it is forecast to be a category 5 and all along those lines as well. So definitely folks will be paying attention to that even here in North Carolina to see which way the track goes and all along that kind of space, because it is expected to rapidly intensify in the record warm Atlantic as it approaches. So that is something that a number of folks are paying attention to, just like a number of folks are paying attention to what is going on in the war between Russia and Ukraine. The Romanian president says if Russian drone fragments fall on our territory, it is a violation of sovereignty. So it looks like they might be getting involved as well, because Russia has downed several Ukrainian drones in its latest strike. And when Sasha gets here, I'm sure he may have some thoughts around that as well. And over there in London, the United Kingdom Prime Minister Sunak is facing a new vote to fill a seat after a lawmaker accused of groping resigns. And here in the United States, Texas abortion advocates are celebrating Mexico's decriminalization. So that is something that is going on as well. And I guess that they're celebrating because that might be a place that folks decide to go to and all along those lines and in that space. But with decriminalization, maybe it won't be as easy and all in that space. But that'll be interesting to see what happens in that regards and all in that way. Mexico City's Jewish ex-mayor has won the ruling party's nomination for the presidential race. So the Mexico's next president will likely be a woman. So that is something that a lot of folks will be paying attention to. And definitely it looks like that is something that is going on in the world stage as well. And Africa, they are proposing a global carbon tax to fight climate change. So definitely there was a Kenyan activist at the Africa Climate Summit who was asking folks to fund green transition on the continent and phase out fossil fuel in that area as well. So that is something that I know a number of people will be paying attention to in terms of world issues and all along those lines. And we may get to some other conversation around this with our panelists and others as they join us and all along those lines. Japan has launched a rocket carrying a moon sniper lunar lander. So that is something that's going on. I know that India just did some recent work in terms of landings and everything. And now it looks like Japan is following suit. And over in Southeast Asia, Kamala Harris, the vice president, has says we have to see the future. So it definitely looks like the Association of Southeast Asian Nations has concluded its 43rd summit in Indonesia. And definitely that is something that a lot of folks will be paying attention to and seeing what is going on in that space. And Gabon's ousted President Bongo is free to go abroad, according to the junta that has taken over in that particular part of the world as well. So there's all kinds of things happening, like I said, in the world. Get ready to get to my guest, and all in that space. By the way, there were two major escapes, one in London and one in the United States. And the prisoners are still out there and are being searched for and trying to be recaptured and all along those lines. So in London, there is a terror suspect on the run after escaping a London prison. And definitely that is something that is going on. Daniel Khalif was wearing chef's clothing when he escaped, according to counterterrorism chiefs and all along that line. So definitely that is something that is going on. It does look like folks are trying to find out how to get that particular gentleman. And over in Pennsylvania authorities are searching for a prison inmate who escaped by climbing the wall over razor wire. So most of Longwood Gardens is to reopen on this particular day as the search for the murderer Cavalcanti is moving along and all in that space. And apparently he escaped by crab walking up a prison wall and all in that kind of way. So that is definitely something that we are seeing and all along those lines. And like I mentioned earlier, the whole debate out after the Dobbs decision is going on with abortion and all in that space. And it looks like abortions have increased significantly in states that border those with bans. So that is something that I know a lot of folks will be paying attention to, including some of the doctors of the world as well. And Biden and COVID and mask mandates are definitely some of the conversations that I'm sure folks will be thinking about, even during the presidential election and all of doing that space, because definitely there are some folks that don't want those kind of restrictions coming back and all along those lines. So that is definitely something that we are seeing, and definitely there are even things going on in the presidential lane as far as the primaries, because apparently there is a lawsuit in Colorado that could bar former President Trump from the primary ballot in Colorado. So a watchdog group is suing to block Trump from the Colorado ballot, citing the 14th Amendment's disqualification clause. So definitely that is what is going on in that space. And in other spaces, the GOP is threatening to impeach the liberal Wisconsin Supreme Court justice who is deemed a real constitutional crisis. So that is something that is going on in the Midwest and all along that kind of space. So like I said, that is just some of the news items that I was seeing, and I'm sure there will be other items as well. I do have some of my guests, regular panelists with me, but I'm going to bring in Dr. Kirkau, and of course, we'll get to some of the other issues that are going on in the world as well. So, Dr. Kirkau, I know that you are a sleep expert and a sleep person that is down there in Georgia. And actually, one of our panelists has some roots in Georgia as well, and he can tell you about that after I ask you a couple of questions and all along those lines. So I know that they say that we're supposed to get a certain amount of sleep. I want to say that I've heard it being somewhere like around 7 to 9 hours. Some people say 6 to 8. And I know that many times, because of the work that I do, not just for Pod TV, but some of my cultural jobs that I'm involved in and a number of other things, I probably don't get that kind of sleep on a regular basis. So what is the right amount of sleep, and does it vary from people to people? Because I do know that there are entrepreneurs that think that they can get by off of 3 to 4 hours of sleep because they are constantly coming up with new ideas for their entrepreneurial businesses and all along those lines. So what's the right amount of sleep that we should be thinking about having and all in that space?
Good morning, Mark. Glad to be here. Great question. And the interesting thing is that the premise of the question is actually the one that is pushed by many people in the media. It's actually pushed by many healthcare professionals. That premise is wrong. That's really not the question to be asking. The question to be asking is, how well should I be sleeping? And so when we think in terms of number of hours, we're talking about quantity, duration of sleep. And although that has relevance, it's nothing compared to actually trying to evaluate the quality of your sleep. So quality trumps quantity almost every time. And when people go down a pathway of looking at the number of hours of sleep, trying to figure out if they're getting enough sleep, that itself suggests there's probably something wrong with their sleep and they don't even recognize it. And so this is a great misfortune in society, in the modern world, where we have all of this technology, all of this scientific information, and yet people are still asking the question, what's the right number of hours of sleep? It's the wrong question. Everybody does vary, as you pointed out astutely, but the problem is you've got to find out what's going on with your sleep, which means your brain waves. And when you figure that out and you actually find ways to improve the quality of your sleep, you discover the number of hours you sleep will change. And I can give you a specific example. When I was suffering from my own sleep problems 30 years ago, and I was always looking at the clock and thinking, well, do I get 7 hours, 7.5, 8.5, whatever? Once I treated my sleep problems, I was often getting by on a range of 5 to 6, 6 to 7 easily. And to this day, that's relatively true. So looking at the quality, working on the quality really leads to the path of having a much better experience with your sleep.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know, Dr. Krakow, the other thing that I hear people talk about, and if I was to open that door which leads into my bedroom, you would see what I am talking about, that people think about is the nature of what you are sleeping on, whether that is a mattress, a full bed set, or a kind of like a waterbed or whatever you might be sleeping
Right.
on, and all along those lines, because different people have different things that they choose to sleep on, including some of those rollout mattresses and all along those lines. But I know that even when I'm up late, I will sometimes see those lovely commercials that are out there for like Serta that are talking about the sleep numbers. I mean, matter of fact, last night I was watching the one that is on regularly with Dwayne Wade and his wife Gabriella Union, and they are talking about their different sleep habits and all along those lines. So it is part of the sleep market in terms of the commercial market. So how much do these mattresses that are promising that they can help you get a better sleep actually a legitimate thought and everything? Because I know a number of people that are probably sleeping on lumpy mattresses and all in that space, and that's probably not conducive to great sleep and all in that kind of way. But I'm just wondering, how much is it a concern, or should people be thinking about getting these mattresses that promise a more heavenly kind of sleep, if I can use that kind of term?
Right. Heavily or deeper sleep, consolidated sleep. So many people go down this pathway of exploring the mattress, and
Mm-hmm.
it's important, absolutely. However, you need to think about, why are so many people doing that? And the answer is twofold. One is, again, something is wrong with the quality of their sleep, or they have a certain sensitivity that makes them need a certain kind of mattress. So mattress shopping is a very good thing. I'm not at all in any way suggesting don't look for higher quality mattresses. And there's lots of things out there that can address these sensitivities: pain patients, people with various temperature issues. So yes, it's valuable. However, it's a signal. It's a very big signal. If you're constantly wondering if your mattress is good enough, that means you're saying to yourself or to your spouse or whomever, I think there's something wrong with my sleep. But people don't often take that next step, which would be, well, let me talk to my doctor about it. Let me get referred to a sleep center. Let me read Dr. Krakow's new book, Life Saving Sleep. In other words, there's so much about sleep that people are disregarding because, unfortunately, in society, sleep is disrespected. And that is something that, did I just lose you?
No, I'm still here.
Oh, okay. Um, that is something that is so important that if you are able to begin to ask the question, well, how well am I sleeping? And that's a very easy question to answer if you think about it this way. When you wake up in the morning, Mark, how do you feel? And that's where we get a lot of information, because most people will say it takes me time to get started, or I need coffee to start, or it takes me several hours to get started. That immediately suggests there could be something wrong with the sleep that a mattress is probably not going to fix.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know that a lot of times when I hear people talking about their bad sleep habits, they mention something that I know you have done research in, and I've never quite understood what it was. I think it has something to do with your breathing and other things, but exactly what is sleep apnea? Because I do hear people that are talking about that. I've even seen drug companies advertise what they can do for sleep apnea and all along those lines, but I'm not sure that everybody in our world audience even has a complete idea of what sleep apnea is or how one even comes up with sleep apnea. And apparently there are two kinds of sleep apnea, because I know that you mentioned both obstructive and central sleep apnea, but I'm just wondering exactly what is that and how does one know that they have sleep apnea?
So sleep breathing disorders are the granddaddy of all sleep disorders. They have so much influence on everything that is going on in your sleep. And the sleep breathing condition simply means that inside your throat, what we call the upper airway, from the nose all the way to the bottom of the throat, there are areas of collapsibility or restriction where the air doesn't get through at the level that it's supposed to. So you're supposed to have a certain volume of air that goes in to produce normal breathing while you sleep. When you don't have that right volume and your throat, so to speak, is collapsing, your brain kicks in and says, I'm not gonna stand for this. So the brain wakes itself up for like 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, very short time. We would never know that. I never knew that. I had this condition for 30 plus years and never realized I had the problem. Now, when it wakes up the brain, what does that mean technically? It's called sleep fragmentation, and it happens hundreds of times during the night. And therefore, what would you expect to feel the next morning? You'd expect to feel unrefreshing sleep. You'd expect to be tired and sleepy during the day. That's exactly what happens. So in the United States and around the world, when people say they are tired and sleepy, the number one cause of that is not likely to be they didn't get enough sleep. The most likely cause is they have something going on with their breathing that's waking them up hundreds of times during the night, and they have absolutely no awareness of it. And so what gets really tricky about this is people can't imagine how big a deal sleep breathing disorders are. But if I rattle off a list to you right now and tell you sleep breathing disorders cause you to have a headache when you wake up in the morning, sleep breathing disorders cause you to wake up at night to use the bathroom to pee, sleep breathing disorders raise your blood pressure so you end up with high blood pressure and you have to take medicine for it. Sleep breathing disorders cause all kinds of cardiac health problems. Sleep breathing disorders cause all kinds of brain damage. You get problems that with your memory, your concentration, your attention. The list keeps going. I could sit here and just keep talking about all the things sleep breathing disorders do, and people would say, well, wait, my doctor told me I have high blood pressure and they gave me a medicine. And I say, well, did your doctor tell you that you probably have sleep apnea? And most people will say, no, they didn't tell me that. And so that's where we have a very big problem in both the scientific world, the healthcare professions, and the media, because they're not broadcasting this crucial information. If you have high blood pressure, you need to get a sleep study. Virtually everybody who has high blood pressure needs to get a sleep study. It's that simple. So this is a very, very big deal. It's very pervasive. And you mentioned obstructive, that's the throat part. And so I'll just briefly mention that central apnea means the throat is open, but now you have problems in your brain otherwise, let's say, that where you're saying to the throat, stay open, but stop breathing. So that's a more serious condition when you have the central apneas.
It sounds like it, and definitely I'm getting ready to bring in some of our other panelists as well, including one that has ties to your area of Georgia and some others that may be joining us as well. And as I bring Lee Newton Rhodes in and all along those lines, then I definitely want to hear your thoughts about chronic nightmares, because I do know that there are folks that are concerned about that as well. And by the way, Jatovia, who the other person that has joined us, is very much in the gaming lane and has 2 young kids. So I'm not sure that he knows believes in sleep and all in that space, but he can say what his own thoughts are around sleep, because I do know that he probably is very much up and awake on a lot of things, whether that is around the esports lanes or around taking care of his 2 kids, one that has special needs and the other that is more gifted, if I can use that terminology, and all along those lines. But definitely, what is your thoughts around chronic nightmares? Because that is something that is a conversation point as well. Because I do know folks that literally will have not just one nightmare, but they'll have a recurring nightmare, and that can definitely disrupt their sleep as well.
Chronic nightmares is how I got my start in sleep medicine. I began working with psychiatrists at the University of New Mexico in 1988, and we developed what is now considered the very best non-drug treatment for chronic nightmares. Most people don't even know that you can treat nightmares. Many people are embarrassed or stigmatized by having nightmares and really don't bring it up for discussion. But nightmares are very common. As much as 5% of the adult population has chronic bad dreams. That means 1 or even more times a week, they're having a difficult or disturbing dream that actually affects them that night, if not the next day. And so the treatment that we discovered and worked on is called imagery rehearsal therapy. It's a cognitive technique, meaning the person literally is training their brain to not have nightmares. And the reason it works, and this is kind of an odd point, but it's important to say, we mostly know about nightmares from the disorder post-traumatic stress disorder, where people have gone through very, very difficult, challenging problems in their life, sexual assaults, being a soldier in war, car accidents. All these people get post-traumatic nightmares. So everybody thinks we'll treat the PTSD and that'll make the nightmare go away. It actually often doesn't work that way. And so what we've learned is that the nightmares function as a learned behavior. And you can use this technique that we're describing, imagery rehearsal therapy, to unlearn the nightmares. And that actually works, which is remarkable because for years, people who had the problem were told, well, just take this drug or that drug. And now there's a non-drug treatment that successfully treats chronic nightmares.
I'm going to turn it over and see if Lee's got a question. But one of the questions I know we've brought up in this network and everything is the notion of whether we are spending enough time doing research on things that are in the field that need this kind of money study and everything from a federal level. And there are some people that think that we are spending enough money on cancer research and on sleep research and on a number of other researches. And there are others that are thinking we are not doing a good job of both on an education standpoint in terms of letting our young people know about it or on a political standpoint. But I was just wondering your thoughts around that. And then Lee and others may want to jump in and have questions as well. But I was wondering, do you think that we are doing enough in the research field and in the education field? Because you just mentioned earlier, and I know that Nick's in the back space and everything, and he may pop on as well, but you mentioned the fact that the media doesn't even cover this, and it is part of our everyday life and all along those lines. So it seems to me that it should be something in both the school system and in the media coverage that isn't happening. But I'd love to hear your thoughts around that.
So let me answer the question by bringing up what you just said about the school system. Mm-hmm. There was a study that was done several years ago and it was in fifth graders. And they looked at the fifth graders who had a C average in their classes, and they did sleep studies on them. And they found an enormous amount of sleep breathing disorders in these kids. So then they said to the parents, would you like to have your tonsils of your child taken out? Because in a fifth grader, removing the tonsils may, markedly improve a sleep breathing disorder. Well, less than a year later, the kids whose parents said, get your tonsils out, their grade average went from C to B. C to B just by getting the tonsils out. The kids who didn't get their tonsils out remained at C. So just think about the consequences of what I've just said in terms of what's happening in society of all of these children that are suffering a sleep breathing disorder, currently doing poorly in school. What would happen to society if all of them were evaluated and treated? And now you've raised their IQ, by the way. That's what you're doing if you actually got that change. So the answer is sleep money dollars, so to speak, for research, whatever, is drastically too low. You're talking about a condition that affects, over 2/3 of the population on a daily basis through what happens at night. So there's an enormous amount of input that is needed from the scientific community to be funded to be able to do this research. And the media has done a really poor job, unbelievably poor job of trying to put out into the world this information, because the media is constantly talking about the number of hours of sleep, which, as I said at the outset, is a false premise. It is relevant for some people, but the big deal is sleep quality. And again, that's not where the attention is being drawn.
Yeah, interesting point and everything. Lee, you've got some ties to Georgia as well, so I'll turn it over to you first. But I know we've also got Nick and Jacoby and even Shaquille. But like I mentioned, Mr. Krakow is actually over there at Mercer, so he definitely got some ties to one of your areas as well. So any questions that you've got? Because
I got a whole bunch. Good morning, Mark. Good morning, Doctor. Welcome to Podcast TV. Pod TV. I'm from the Atlanta area. You mentioned nightmares. A bunch of questions. I want to start with sleepwalking. Is the person actually sleeping? Is it quality sleep, not quality sleep? And also, you talked about quantity versus quality. How much quality can a person have, and to reduce the quantity? In other words, can I pack a full night of sleep into 3 hours, 4 or 5 hours, and still be refreshed and get the benefits of a full night's sleep, whether that's meant to be 8 hours?
Right. So biologically, the chances of getting down into the 3 and 4 hour range is much more genetically driven. So if you happen to have a certain constitution that can get to that, that's a possibility. What's more realistic is that if you are currently sleeping 9 hours because you have really bad sleep apnea and you just need more and more sleep to try to even get close to what you need, that person, once they start using, let's say, a PAP machine to treat the sleep apnea, very commonly will drop down to 7.5 or even 7, where they were at 9. But now let's take the reverse case, because it's even more interesting. Suppose you have insomnia and you say you only sleep 4 hours a night. Well, it turns out most people with insomnia, which is supposedly this big psychological problem, and it certainly makes sense that it is psychological, most of them have a sleep breathing condition too. We've published on this widely for decades, that most chronic insomniacs, especially those taking sleeping pills and not doing well, have sleep breathing conditions. If you treat the sleep breathing disorder in the insomnia patient, now their 4 hours of sleep could easily go up to 5 or 6 hours of sleep. And so those numbers are very difficult to predict for anybody until you've evaluated the quality. Regarding the sleepwalking question, yes, you are asleep. And that kind of condition is highly relevant to be evaluated by a sleep doctor if the person has sleepwalking and injury. Most sleepwalking is benign, But if there's injury, it absolutely needs an evaluation by a sleep specialist.
Hey, just one quick follow-up. I appreciate that. Is there a minimum number of hours a person needs, assuming they're not taking caffeine or anything else to keep them awake?
Wait, say it again. A minimum number of hours to do what?
Sleep, quality sleep, assuming they're not, when they wake up in the morning, taking coffee, caffeine, energy drinks, what have you.
Let me answer the question in a different way. Most people don't know this fact about the brain, that there's a thing called brainwashing in science that refers to the glymphatic system in your brain that cleans out the waste matter while you're sleeping. And when does it do its best job of cleaning out the waste? In deep sleep. So now when you ask me the question, how much, it's like, as long as you can get the highest quality of cleaning in your brain, that implies something is going really, really healthy. And so whatever number that would turn out to be, if you've asked me, have I ever gotten by with 4 hours of sleep and functioned really well? And the answer is yes, I have. But regularly, it's more likely that my hours would be between 6 and 7. And it varies. So again, you can't make that prediction. One day we'll have a Dr. McCoy tricorder and we'll put it up to the brain and we'll figure out how well is your brainwashing system working. And with that information, and by the way, that's probably coming. There's people who have patents on all kinds of things looking at this brainwashing system, trying to figure out how we can make it better.
Thank you.
And Nick, I don't know if you got a question as well, or Shaquille, but one of the other things that crossed my mind is, I know that as we get older, and you mentioned it earlier in the conversation, you do get up in the middle of the night for various reasons. It might be a midnight snack, it might be using the restroom, a number of other things that can cause us to get up in the middle of the night. So I think a vast majority of the population has what I would consider to be broken sleep and all along those lines. So is that problematic? Because I think that most of us here in this space and most of us that are listening have probably woken up in the middle of the night on a regular basis. Like I said, it might be because you want that midnight snack, or because you want to you have like automatic thought of something you want to write down, or like I said, it might be a physical thing that is going on as well, whether that is a bowel movement or as you mentioned earlier, taking a piss or along those lines. So how much of is that an issue, this broken sleep, that I would argue the vast majority of the population has?
Right. So all of the above in terms of the various reasons, but there's a zinger here, a really big one, and we use this in sleep medicine all the time to close the deal with our patients who have sleep apnea but are really reluctant to go forward with treatment. So if you ask somebody about snoring, and they might say, well, I don't care about my snoring, somebody else cares about my snoring. But one of the greatest impacts sleep apnea has is on your cardiovascular and kidney systems. And it does it through this very intricate process where when you're struggling to breathe, it puts all this pressure in your chest cavity. Well, your chest cavity then puts the pressure on the blood vessels inside it, and that blood then rushes back to your heart faster and in greater volume than it would all through the night. In that chamber of the heart, there's a sensor, and the sensor predicts, or I shouldn't say predicts, measures and says, I detect fluid overload. So all this blood's going into the heart says, I've got fluid overload. What do? The heart releases its own diuretic. The heart releases its own diuretic. It goes to the kidneys. You wake up and pee. So most people think they drink too much water when they go to bed, or they have a prostate problem, or they have a bladder problem. All of the above are relevant. But the biggest single factor of why people wake up at night to pee is usually sleep apnea. Most people, when they go to a doctor, they say, well, how many times is it normal to get up at night to pee? And the answers they're going to get are 1 or 2. If you come to me and you ask me, how many times a night should a person wake up to pee? Can you guess the number I'm going to show you?
I would guess it would probably be similar to what they said, but maybe a little bit higher, maybe 3 or 4.
No, I'm saying normal. What's normal? Normal is 0.
0.
It should be 0. You should be able to get through the night without urinating. And I've seen that in people that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s eliminate trips to the bathroom, by treating their sleep disordered breathing. And that's why I say that closes the deal. Because as you get older, you do not want to get up at night to urinate. You have a risk for falling. You have a risk for major injury, not to mention the hassle of now I got to get back into bed and try to go back to sleep. So this is called nocturia. And we have a short video, by the way. It's called nocturiacures.com. It's 5 minutes, and it actually describes the same thing I just talked about. And when we help people understand this aspect of sleep, all of a sudden, it's like, well, sign me up. I really want to get involved with this, because if you can eliminate my trips to the bathroom, that's a big deal, and I'm got a go sign for that.
Yeah, Dr. Krakow, it sounds to me that sleep is important. It's important for your physical and mental health. How many courses are offered in high school and middle school in the United States today? Because I know Shaquille's in Australia, so he doesn't care about the U.S. And he doesn't sleep anyway, so he doesn't care about sleep. He's
I never sleep.
But in the United States, how many courses are offered in high school and middle school on sleep disorders and sleep issues?
Yeah, probably 0. I mean, there's probably a school here or there that says we have a health class and, we're going to talk a little bit about sleep, but they don't get into this at any kind of level that would help people realize that there are sleep services out there, sleep disorder centers and so forth. And yet there's millions of kids suffering right now. Sleep breathing conditions, insomnia, nightmares. Another condition is called restless legs and leg jerks. I'm involved in a very interesting program at Gateway Behavioral Health Services here in Savannah, where they have a psychiatry residency training program. Yeah. And they've hired me to consult with them and train the psychiatrists how to treat sleep disorders. Because in the field of psychiatry, all they learn is pull out the prescription pad and write a different pill if somebody can't sleep. And when they come back and they're having problems, they go, well, let's try this pill. We're teaching them that non-drug treatments, whether it's a PAP machine, whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy, whether it's imagery rehearsal therapy, all kinds of non-drug treatments can resolve sleep problems much more effectively than medication.
Okay, so you're saying this is an important issue. The media ignores it, but our school system in the United States says differently. It says this is not important and we should ignore it. What would you tell our educators around the country and around the world about sleep being an important issue as opposed to an unimportant issue?
Right. Well, the schools are not completely oblivious, but they're into the whole schedule thing. They've been inundated with a certain amount of information about circadian rhythms. Should teenagers be able to sleep a little bit later, go to school a little bit later? Some of that's good information. The problem is, harkening back to the original point, sleep quality. In society, we have students that are complaining constantly they're not getting enough sleep. And so if we listen to that, we should then ask the next question. Are you tired and sleepy during the day? And if the person says yes, you go, well, let's figure that out. It's not just a matter of more hours of sleep. It's a question of how are you sleeping? How well are you sleeping? And so that could easily be instituted in schools all over the world. A survey of 10 questions could ask people simple things. The simplest thing would be, how do you feel after you sleep? And if the person says, well, I don't really feel that good, red flag right there. One question. Another question could just be, how sleepy are you after lunch? Again, why? You shouldn't be sleepy after lunch. It's not normal to be sleepy after lunch. After a good night of sleep, you should have a full head of steam that lasts throughout the day. You may have small dips here and there, but those dips are not the kind of thing where you suddenly are, looking for some place to put your head down and go to sleep. So a lot of this stuff could be easily instituted in the sleep schools, and just think what it would do for the achievement level. I mean, you'd think the schools would want to do this because then their students would be doing better, and we would see higher rates of literacy just by fixing people's sleep.
Dr.
Excuse me. How does diet and exercise play into this, either during the day or right before going to sleep?
Well, diet and exercise are very important health factors, but whether or not they directly affect sleep is a lot more confusing. In other words, exercise, everybody says, well, don't exercise too late at night because it might affect your sleep. And that could be true for some people. But what's much more important is that if you do exercise daily, it's likely to make your sleep deeper. So it's clear you should be thinking about exercise. Diet is different. People have different aspects of that it's too big of a topic. Plus, a lot isn't even known about how you can use your diet to help your sleep. The downside part is that when you don't sleep well, you have more of a tendency to overeat and gain weight.
But yeah, how about the idea of junk food towards bedtime, sugary foods?
Well, what's interesting about that is that some people are using that because they're having trouble sleeping, and that carbohydrate load is helping them get to sleep. Now they may not necessarily realize that, or they may, but they're doing it for that particular reason, and so you can't easily take that away from them because they say, I won't sleep. On the other hand, it's obviously not good to have that, and so you'd like to teach them other ways to fall asleep.
Hey, Dr. Cacao, just really quickly, are you seeing, because actually Nick mentioned it earlier about the educators, and I did say I was going to bring this up, are our politicians, because I sometimes wonder if they are getting enough sleep themselves, if they are able to bring this to an issue to the forefront on the political lane and all in that space. So are you thinking that it is something that our politicians should be trying to do something, maybe even legislative or something along those lines? You've definitely mentioned funding earlier and everything. So are our politicians here in the United States and even around the world doing enough to bring this issue to the forefront?
Well, we've seen politicians falling asleep at their job. Of course, in that situation, we know they are asked to pull all-nighters for their congressional work and so forth. So the big deal here is that in any walk of life, whether it's politics, whether it's academia, whether it's the working class, whether it's people who are downtrodden, in all walks of life, people are suffering from these sleep issues, and it is a big deal. If you want to bring it up to the money angle, it's very obvious that if you made a major effort to treat sleep problems in society, you would actually find that you're increasing the gross domestic product. There's just no question about it. The level of achievement that happens to people when their sleep disorders are treated. We did a study on this many years ago in New Mexico. We were looking at a group of individuals who are in a welfare to work program. And we saw that more than 60% of the people had sleep problems that were very serious. And we're sitting there thinking, you're in a welfare to work program. Like, how are you supposed to learn how to do this job when you have been cognitively impaired for X number of years, if not decades? And this is an area that I've wondered about actually for a very long time. We know, let's take one example very specific to the United States. The Black population in America has a very, very pronounced rate of sleep breathing disorders, a very, very high rate. And that means that the children in the Black communities have very, very high rates. And so you're talking about a population that has suffered tremendously in terms of academic issues. And now we've got something that could actually impact that. So is somebody going to go out there and say, let's put sleep disorders in the inner cities of all of our major communities and encourage Black children to be tested for sleep apnea? If we did that, and we actually got these individuals treated, as I said before, we would see a rise in academic achievement just by doing it. And that absolutely would be cost effective, because these people would then become much more productive members of society. They would achieve higher things in life. They'd be able to go to higher levels of education. None of this is being talked about. None of this is being done. Those of us in sleep medicine are the few people who talk about this and realize how big a deal it is.
Jacoby, you got a question?
Actually, yeah. Because we had touched on the scholastic part, and I don't want to belabor that point. One of the things that I want to go into is dealing with the technological side, because I know there are plenty of pushes from not only Apple but also Google with the many apps that they put out talking about studying your sleep. Like the iWatch has the sleep tracker. Google, when they bought Fitbit, they installed the sleep tracking stuff on all of their health and fitness applications. Do these actually work? Are they something that people should really look into utilizing? Because many have phones.
The short answer, and the industry is going to hate me, the short answer is no, they don't work. But the long answer is they actually are useful in a variety of ways, because they give qualitative dimensions. I'll give you a story. I have a friend who was using it and was talking about, the data, which said, well, this is good sleep, this is bad sleep, different, variables that come up. And based on the discussion I had with him, I said, you probably have a sleep breathing disorder. Why don't you start by cleaning out your nose with nasal saline rinses and using a nasal strip on your nose? So what was interesting was, within a couple of weeks of using a nasal strip, he said, my sleep is better. And guess what? On my tracker, it's actually showing that my sleep is better, that I'm getting more of the deeper versus the fragmented. So that's still not high quantity, not a very quantitative metric like we would have in a sleep lab. But qualitatively, for his tracker, just by him using a nasal strip, showing that he went from lighter sleep to deeper sleep, that's a very big deal. So trackers used in that way are very good, and trackers used to help people say, oh, wait, maybe my sleep quality isn't as good as I thought. If they're using it for the number of hours, it's really not going to drive them in the best direction.
Hey, Shaquille, any questions from you? Because I know that you are definitely in the financial trading lane, and I know that a lot of financial traders don't necessarily get a lot of sleep. And I'm thinking even greyhound racers, which is another thing that you're interested in, don't get a lot of sleep either. So, any questions that you've got, Shaquille?
Well, I'm not a trainer. I'm just an owner. So yeah, I got these because I have a guy, ex-military guy. He used to be in charge of the health and fitness for one of our rugby teams. It's like the footy, the football for you guys over there. And a very good friend of mine, he said, look, while you're exercising and et cetera, you should consider getting these. That they help. Now, these aren't foolproof, and actually they both have slightly different results. But the results are fairly close. And I remember he rang me after about a week of me being on it, and he said, dude, like you can't carry on like this. And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, I'm watching you, and you're only getting like 2 to 3 hours sleep per day, and you're only getting like 20 minutes at a time, and then you're getting up again. You can't survive like that. And I said, yeah, but haven't you read this whole thing about the sleep bank? I make it up on the weekend. I have a couple of bottles of wine and pass out all weekend. What's the problem? And he went, no, bro, it doesn't work like that. Mm-hmm. But as I lost weight, one of the things that I found, and I stopped smoking, so I stopped snoring. And to the point that I was at my cousin's house, and they actually were so alarmed by how quiet my bedroom was that they kept coming in and checking on me during the night. I was totally oblivious to this. And the next morning they said, oh, we were so worried about you. What have you done to stop snoring? I said, I don't know. I didn't know I snored. And it was I'd stopped smoking for 5 months. But one of the things I'll say is I felt amazing and I felt great. The problem was that all of a sudden I'm sleeping for 6 hours a day and 8 hours a day, and I don't have time to sleep for 8 hours. I've got shit to do. So unfortunately, when the medical advice is probably correct that, you should get sleep, a bit more sleep and stuff, there's not enough hours in the day to even get 6 hours, and sometimes not enough hours in the day to get 6 hours in one hit. So when I do monitor using these devices, I'll find that I get into deep sleep much more quickly than most people. But when I was younger, I found it very difficult going to school, in my teenage years. I'd find it very difficult to fall asleep in the first place because I'd be wide awake and full of energy. And so it was very hard for me when I was younger to maintain a sort of consistent routine. But I do want to actually ask you, Doctor.
Well, actually, before you ask, can I comment on what you've said?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So some people do have what's called a stronger or genetically designed reticular activating system, which has something to do with the way their brain works. It's different than other people. And you see this in a lot of high achievers, entrepreneurs, inventors. You might even see it in people with a lot of ambitions like celebrities or politicians, so forth. And so those individuals may actually be able to function at a certain level, very high level, with less sleep than other people. But that's not the norm. The norm is that if a person, in my opinion and my experience, achieves a higher quality of sleep, they would never care about the number of hours they're sleeping, because the level of cognitive ability would be so much higher than anything they've ever achieved before in their life. They'd be thinking, that's what I want. I want this clarity of brain functioning because now I get my work done faster, cleaner, more efficiently. And that's exactly what happens. I know people who, they've lived these lives. They were in their 20s and 30s and they were going nowhere. And the next thing you know, they treat their sleep breathing disorder in particular. And now all of a sudden they're in college and they're going to go to grad school. It's like complete life change. So this cognitive ability is a very big deal, and it does relate to quality of sleep. One other anecdote I want to give you just really quickly. The greatest sleep researcher in the world, who passed away 5 years ago, Christian Guilleminault, said that 80% of people with full beards have a sleep breathing disorder. So even if you stopped your snoring, you can still have a sleep breathing disorder. You may not have known that. Snoring is not the perfect sign of a sleep breathing disorder. And so all I'm getting at, Shaquille, is if you do still have a sleep breathing disorder, and if you did evaluate that and treat that, then you might have a clearer perspective on what it means to get by on less or more hours of sleep, if that makes sense.
Well, I don't usually have a beard, by the way. It's more laziness at the moment because I'm finally back home. But I'll just say a couple of things. So, firstly, I accept what you've said. I think in my case, I have businesses all over the world, so it's not so much a matter that of production levels of being more productive. It's that I don't have 6 hours because I've got to deal with different time zones, and so I need to be there when they're open. And I try to curtail that a little bit. One of the things
I respect all of that.
One of the things I've found in my life, though, ever since I was a child, is I actually don't do very well during the day. If you want me to be at my most alert and my most productive, you've got to get me at nighttime. I seem to sort of be a vampire, the complete opposite of everybody else. And I'm sure there's reasons for that you'd probably be able to expand on. But I want to ask you a question. You talked about parents who agreed to have the tonsils removed from the Year 5 students, and those students then having a marked increase in their grades. I'm just curious, though, is that necessarily a causal relationship that was the tonsils being removed, or is it that parents that are more likely to focus in on issues to do with their kids? So, for example, my kid's only getting C's, maybe there's things that I can do, are more likely to encourage those kids to study more or to do other things. So what I'm trying to say is that those parents may actually be doing things differently to the parents that didn't. And in relation to the other comments that you've made about treating sleep apnea and other sleep disorders, one would assume, though, that people who lose weight are going to breathe better, that we know that there's a high rate of being overweight and of diabetes amongst the Black population, amongst the Indian population in the world. So treating those would automatically improve both sleep function as well as mental capacity. So, is it necessarily just sleep? Are we just treating a symptom of an underlying issue if we only focus in on sleep, or are there other things that we should be factoring into this equation?
Right. Great question. So what causes a sleep breathing disorder? Where did I point? Here. I didn't point here. Sleep breathing disorders are not caused by obesity. Let me repeat. Being overweight does not cause a sleep breathing disorder. It aggravates it. It makes it worse. But this is where the problem is. So, yes, it's a very good thing to lose weight, a very good thing for lots of health reasons. And yes, it will improve a sleep breathing disorder. It will not eliminate a sleep breathing disorder in 95% of the cases. So it's very important to know that if you have a weight problem and you have a sleep problem, you don't just say lose the weight, you say treat the sleep breathing problem and treat the weight problem. Regarding the question about the parents, why didn't the parents do something else all those years to get their kids up from a C level to a B level? So if they were really conscientious parents, why didn't they find something else? Why didn't they find tutors? In other words, the fact that this study was a short study over 1 year and these kids got a tonsillectomy and that was the only obvious intervention strongly suggests that changing in their cognition had something to do with it. Yes, many, many more studies can be done on this to prove the point. Sadly, those studies are not being done.
But there's a risk, surely you'd have to agree. There's a risk of some level of confirmation bias there, because clearly some parents, after being made aware of a problem, may have acted differently. You could make the argument that those parents that were maybe a little more aloof, who said, look, my kid's fine, it doesn't matter, leave my kid alone, don't cut their tonsils out, that may have been a contributing factor in environmental issues with that child.
Right. So absolutely, there's a confirmation bias, and I'll give you a perfect example. In 1998, when I treated my sleep disorder, I then, in the next 5 years, wrote 2 books, opened up a sleep research facility, opened up a private sleep center, and was working basically 80 hours a day and loving it, having no difficulties with a need to nap during the daytime, which I'd been doing for 35 years prior to 1998, needing and wanting and sometimes demanding a nap for 35 years. In 1998, completely changed within 3 months. And now I'm writing books, I'm opening up centers, I'm publishing research papers. That is a big confirmation bias I have personally about what happens to people when your brain is allowed to actually operate the way it's supposed to during the day, because you have effectively treated what was going on with it during the night through good, high quality sleep.
Now, Dr. Barry, I've got one last question for you before the show wraps up. I see on your website you've got some books there. For the audience that's not in the United States, are your books available, as far as you're aware, outside of the United States?
Oh, yeah.
And for people out of the US, can they get in contact with your website? I'll probably give you a call myself and say, right, talk to me. What have I got to do? What can people do to get in contact with you and get in contact with your centers?
I appreciate that. Thank you very much for all this time. My book, Life Saving Sleep, is on Amazon all over the world, so you can get it that way. It's also in a Kindle version, so the ebook is also available. On my website, I have other resources, other books. I've got a treatment book for people with chronic nightmares. I've got a treatment video for people with chronic nightmares. And then there's some books on insomnia. Also, that video about trips to the bathroom at night is there. There's also a free video series on how to breathe better through your nose. And then the last one is I run a sleep coaching service now. So people contact me when they're often not doing well with other sleep providers or other healthcare providers, and something just isn't right, and they're asking for additional advice and education on how to move in new directions.
One quick last question for the doctor. if I may.
Yeah.
It is
Go ahead.
available on Amazon.com.au. So the book is available in Australia, and like every guest that comes on, I've already bought your book, so it's on its way to me now.
Thank you very
One
much.
last question about naps during the day. A power nap or half an hour nap during the day. Beneficial, waste of time, crutch? Your thoughts?
I've got an absolute, I wish I could talk a whole hour about napping. Napping is a crucial experience that people should personally tailor to their own experience to make it work well. You can do naps late in the day and long and then screw up your sleep at night. But if you learn things about your own napping behavior, you can discover things like you can take a 60-second nap, a 5-minute nap, a 15-minute nap, 20-minute. You can learn to do that at various times of the day, depending upon what's going on. The bigger question, of course, is why are you napping? So you're napping usually because something is wrong with your sleep at night. So first, try to fix that. But that could be a long process, as it is for many people, just to get into a sleep center. Therefore, napping can be invaluable. Napping can be life-saving, making you a safer driver. So it's important to understand, though, that the longer you nap, the harder it is sometimes to get up. That then could become unsafe. So shorter naps and earlier in the day are the usual blend that work for most people. And I strongly urge people to use the nap in this judicious way. One last point, though. If you nap and you feel terrible afterwards, that absolutely means do not pass go, do not collect $200, go directly to your local sleep center.
Thank you.
Have there been studies, I assume they have in anything in medicine, have there been studies on other animals and primates to see what sort of effects we can observe? Because certainly we talk about psychology, psychiatry, and other types of things. We've done a lot of studies. Have there been those sorts of studies completed?
There's been some studies that tend to look at things like how brain damage might occur with changes in oxygenation while you sleep. An incredible study done by Dr. David Gozel showed that when rats are exposed to a low oxygen level, which is called hypoxia or hypoxemia, where it just stays low, the rats adjust to it. And they don't have much, if any, kind of changes in their brain. But if you expose them to oxygen that does this all night long, that's called oxygen desaturations, oxygen fluctuations. That's what you see in sleep apnea. In sleep apnea, that's what the brain is doing. It's constantly waking up, but the oxygen is doing the same thing. When they did that in rats, they demonstrated brain damage, even when the number, the value of the oxygen was still at 90%. So this is crazy because you're thinking, wait a second, if your oxygen level is above 90, shouldn't that be good enough? No. If it's fluctuating as it does because of a sleep breathing disorder, you end up with brain damage. So it's very clear, and that's why the subtlety of breathing disorders is such a gold mine opportunity to help people, because there are conditions called upper airway resistance syndrome, which is a very subtle variant of sleep apnea. It looks very mild when you're looking at it on the sleep test, but has this incredible impact on the patient's cognitive abilities because it's doing the same sleep fragmentation.
They had a theory that athletes, that they observed this amongst some African athletes and some Himalayan athletes that were living constantly at higher elevations, that they seemed to perform naturally better. And now you see a lot of athletes that actually subject themselves to lower oxygen levels to train their bodies. And then when they actually get into the normal environment, they have higher oxygen levels and they outperform their competitors a lot of the time, or they outperform their own results. I'm not aware of any studies where they've tested if you have a prolonged period of time where a person sleeps at reduced oxygen levels, whether the increase in oxygen levels when they wake up would have that kind of effect. Has any study like that been done? And if not, do you think that would be a worthwhile study to do?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not familiar with any research in that area. It's not my area of research. I will tell you the one thing regarding athletes and celebrities that we've seen over the years, and other people are seeing it too, is that these individuals, if you look at their jaw structure, it's very different than the average person, so to speak. Most people who achieve these levels of, again, athleticism in particular, you often see this in people who are airplane pilots, that the jaw structure is very large, meaning that their airway in the back of the throat is very large. In other words, they don't have these conditions we've been talking about here. And so that's a very big deal. If you look at what's happening in society, there is some anthropological theories that our jaws are getting smaller. And that has to do perhaps with diet. It may have to do with who we marry and the genetic, transmission. We really don't know for sure, but if the jaw is getting smaller and the airway is getting smaller, now you have a anatomical basis for how there could be an epidemic of sleep breathing disorders. And it's fascinating to see how these athletes, have so much capacity with that jaw structure.
Hey, Dr. Kirkconnell, we're ready to wind down and everything, but I did have one last quick question for you, because I actually had a sleep coach on one of my shows yesterday here on Pod TV, and we were talking about the nature sounding kind of apps that are very popular that are supposed to help with sleep as well. So I was just wondering your thoughts around those, whether they are something that folks should be investing in, because you have a number of people that will be trying to hear like a waterfall or the sound of birds or a number of other things that are supposed to enhance their sleep and all along those lines. So do you find that those are effective or ineffective?
Right. Absolutely, they can be effective. The issue we're dealing with is the individual's inability to turn off their mind, which is the single biggest complaint having to do with sleep. That people say, I just can't turn off my mind. Whether it's going to sleep or waking up in the middle of the night and trying to go back to sleep, I just can't turn off my mind. Now, there are techniques that I write about in my book that are internal, that you can do in your own mind and body to turn off that motor, so to speak. Nonetheless, if you find a sound machine, you can find one on your phone. You don't even have to buy anything. You can find various sounds, and absolutely, for some people, it key points in their life. They go, this works for me. This gets my brain not thinking. So I'm a strong believer. I don't know that there's lots and lots of research on these devices, but anecdotally, many people, I think, use these things effectively and should continue to use them unless they can, of course, find other therapies to help them long term.
Well,
one of the things that I would do is I'd listen to lectures on finance or law or economics or whatever. I mean,
it's a good point.
And I would listen to all that stuff in the background, and that would actually help me fall asleep. And what was really interesting was I found that I would all of a sudden, somebody would say something to me, and I'd say, well, there's this particular law that says something else. And I'd be quoting US case law, which I know nothing about from Australia.
Sleep learning.
And I'd say, I don't know, but I learned it in my sleep. Is that a technique that works, or is it just for crazy people like me, or what do you think?
I think there's going to be a lot of research on this area, because there always has been a lot of curiosity. But I don't think there's much out there, at least that I've read, that says, here's exactly the technique, here's how you do it. I mean, somebody out there listening may know that there is something and they've tried it, and you're mentioning, your own technique. But the notion that you could learn is not at all unsound or illogical, because your brain is active all night long. It's like your brain doesn't go away. Yes, it needs its rest, but it's active. And think about dreaming. Dreaming is a place where you are learning. Dreaming is where you are engaged with memories, you're engaged with images, you're engaged with processing emotion. And so we know that people actually are either learning or reinforcing what they've learned through the process of sleep. So I don't think it's a stretch to think something like that will one day be discovered in a very useful way.
So I'll ask you one last question. You made mention of nightmares, something that I've never really experienced until I started using nicotine patches to help me give up smoking, and then they became quite vivid. But one of the things I found was, okay, I'd wake up a bit groggy, but after a while I got used to it, and I actually kind of enjoy the nightmares a little bit because that might sound really strange, but it's somewhat cathartic because oftentimes it's similar themes, and then I kind of deal with those themes. And I don't know, there's sort of more wisdom that I gain, or a better way of being able to move on because I've experienced the worst possible thing I could have imagined, plus worse, and then I'm okay.
Yeah, you've actually described the healthiest adaptive processing of nightmares. You've described the way it's supposed to work. In other words, most people who go through difficult life experiences are going to have nightmares. They're going to have disturbing dreams. And most people don't get post-traumatic stress disorder. Most people go through a period of, say, approximately a month. I mean, it could be longer for some people, but just say a month, where they're processing that experience, they're having some bad dreams, and they're doing exactly what you just said. They're waking up from the disturbing dream and they don't like it, and it was like originally, very uncomfortable, unpleasant, challenging, and it drains them. But it's a process, and they're working through it. And by the end of a month, again, in general, they're going, gee, I don't even seem to have these nightmares anymore. And I guess I've worked through it. I guess I'm doing. So there is a healthy aspect of nightmaring that occurs early on. It's for the people who have the chronic condition that it's like, no, get me out of this place. This is awful. This is happening 5 nights a week. It's ruining my sleep. And these individuals are suffering terribly, and often the ones with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, great. We appreciate the conversation.
Dealing with things that happened 10 years ago, that did bother me in the back of my mind all the time. But finally, I was just able to let go. So
yeah, very good.
Dr. Kerkow, greatly appreciate the conversation. Hopefully we'll have you back on in the near future. You've definitely brought a lot of insight into what is going on with sleep and our sleep habits and a lot of those kind of things. I know that there are a lot of folks that are having a nightmare of sorts, and I'll just close with this news item and everything here in Durham, North Carolina, because here where I am at and where Nick is at and Jatovia is also, there is a group of folks that are on strike because they are feeling that they are not getting enough pay and all along those lines, but it's the garbage workers. So there's a lot of garbage that is piling up in this area, and I'm sure that might be creating some nightmares for people here in this area because of the stench and other things that might be going on in that space, and hopefully they will come to a resolution in that space. But it is the sanitation workers. I think they're actually having a action at City Hall later on this afternoon. It might even be going on as we're speaking and everything, because that is something that is going on in this space. And like I said, sometimes external factors can lead to nightmares as well. And I'm sure you would agree with that, Dr. Kerkow, that sometimes external things can lead to the nightmares also.
Mark,
Thank you.
You went serious. I thought you were going to do spoilers for Ahsoka's episode 4 that just came out on Tuesday. Everybody loves Star Wars. I can tell you all about it.
Thank you all, gentlemen. I really appreciate your time. I don't think we put anybody to sleep with this conversation.
Not yet. On the panel. Mark, I want to ask you a quick question there. So who's the nightmare for exactly? The people that are striking, or the poor citizens that have got the rubbish piling up because these people are greedily wanting more money?
I was thinking the nightmare was actually for the citizens in this particular case, because they
why don't the citizens then go on strike and say, we're not paying you until you fix up the rubbish?
That's not how it works.
Well, why not? See, it's greed, as Lee has pointed out to me.
It's not greed.
It's greed when you want to keep your own money, not greed when you want to reach to someone else's
By
money.
your opinion, you feel it's greedy for people to ask for more money because
You're not asking. You're not asking. You're extorting.
That's what they're asking.
You're extorting. That's extortion.
Why are we jumping into this at the end of a good sleep study?
You have monopoly over cleaning up the rubbish, and then you say,
Mark, let's go. Let's let Shaq have his greedy day and get a nap.
We'll also get a nap and everything. We talk about the show, including